My name is Maya Bennett, and the first time my sister handed me a dinner bill in front of 40 people, she did it with a smile. It was Danielle's 35th birthday. She had rented the private room of a restaurant called the Orchard Room, the kind of place with dark green booths, brass lamps, and servers who carried plates with both hands because everything looked expensive. I had agreed to help with one thing. 3 weeks earlier, Danielle had called me and said, "Would you cover the room deposit? I'm short this month, and I'll reimburse you after my bonus." I told her I could cover the deposit. I even asked for the amount in writing. She sent me a message, just the private room fee. Nothing else. Promise. That was what I believed when I walked into the restaurant. I brought a birthday card. I wore a navy dress. I greeted cousins I had not seen in months. I watched Danielle take photographs beside a wall of gold balloons while everyone told her how beautiful the room looked. Then dinner ended. The server placed a black folder near Danielle's elbow. Danielle opened it, glanced at the total, and turned toward me. "Maya's got it," she said. She said it loudly enough for the whole table to hear. Someone laughed, as if it were a family tradition. My mother raised her glass. My brother-in-law said, "We knew the responsible sister would save the night." I looked at the folder. The number was not the private room deposit. It was the entire dinner entrees, wine pairings, a dessert display, extra appetizers, a late-night coffee station, 40 guests. Before I could speak, Danielle slid the folder across the table toward me, and beneath it, almost hidden beside the cash register, I noticed a second black folder with a small white label. I could not read the label yet, but I knew it mattered. The room itself made the moment feel unreal. A birthday banner hung above Danielle's chair, and the flowers on the tables were the kind she had spent weeks choosing from photographs. Every detail had been designed to feel effortless. That was why the folder looked so out of place when it landed near me. It broke the illusion. Behind the candles and the smiling guests, someone had been tracking costs, approvals, and card numbers. I realized that the party had never been free. The only question was whose name Danielle expected to place beside the total. I watched the guests shift in their chairs and understood that public pressure works because it relies on decent people wanting to protect a moment. Everyone at that table wanted the birthday to continue. Danielle had used that wish as leverage. But a celebration that only works when one person is silently assigned the cost is not a celebration. It is a transfer of responsibility disguised as warmth. For years, my family had treated my reliability like a shared resource. I was the person who could be called when someone forgot a deadline, when a bill came early, when a reservation had to be fixed, when a relative wanted help, without the embarrassment of asking everyone else. I had told myself that I was generous. The truth was more complicated. I had become useful because I was afraid that saying no would make people decide I was selfish. And once people learn that you will rescue them from discomfort, they stop seeing the rescue as kindness. They start seeing it as part of the plan. Danielle knew that better than anyone. She was charming in a way I had never been. She could turn a request into a joke, and a joke into an expectation. If she needed something, she did not ask directly. She created a moment where refusing looked cruel. That was what she had done at the restaurant. If I questioned the bill, 40 guests would watch. If I said no, the celebration would stall. If I paid, everyone would call it generous and move on. But I had changed since the last time my family handed me a crisis and called it a favor. I had started keeping records. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, because I wanted to stop making decisions based on panic. 3 weeks before the party, I had saved Danielle's message about the deposit. I had saved the amount. I had saved the date. I had also saved a message from my mother, sent 2 days before the dinner, that said, "Danielle is so relieved you agreed to help. She's planning a beautiful evening." Planning a beautiful evening was not the same as authorizing me to pay for it. I opened my phone under the table and searched the thread. There it was, just the private room fee. Nothing else. Promise. I looked at Danielle. "I agreed to the room deposit," I said. Her smile barely moved. "And now you're helping with the rest," she replied. "Don't make it awkward." I remembered how often I had been rewarded for being low maintenance. In our family, the person who made a problem disappear was described as the person who asked how the problem started was described as difficult. That distinction had shaped my choices for years. I had paid for peace and called it generosity. Sitting at that table, I saw the price of that habit more clearly than I ever had before. Before that evening, I had confused being prepared with being guarded. I thought keeping a message or confirming an amount meant I was treating family like strangers. Now I saw the opposite. Clear agreements gave relationships a better chance. They prevented love from being tested by surprises and made help something a person could offer without fear. The table went quiet in the way large groups do when everyone senses a conflict but hopes someone else will make it disappear. Danielle leaned closer to me. "Maya, please," she whispered. "I already told them you had it." That was the important part. She had already told them. She had created a promise using my name before she had asked for my permission. My mother gave me a look from across the table. It was the look she used when she wanted me to protect the mood. "It's her birthday," she said softly. I looked around the room. There were people from Danielle's office, friends from college, neighbors, a few relatives who had never once asked how my work was going but were suddenly ready to praise me for being dependable. The server stood beside the table with a professional expression that made it clear she had seen this kind of moment before. I asked her, "Could you bring me an itemized copy, please?" Danielle's face changed. "Why?" she asked. "Because I need to see what I'm being asked to pay for." My brother-in-law tried to laugh. "Come on, Maya, it's dinner, not an audit." But I had learned that people call something an audit when they do not want the numbers examined. The server nodded. "Of course," she said. "I'll bring the event order and the itemized check." Then she looked toward the counter, where the second folder waited. Danielle followed her gaze too quickly. That was when I knew the other folder was not random. It was part of the story Danielle had hoped I would never ask to read. A few guests started looking away, but I did not blame them. They had not created the problem. They were simply watching a public assumption fail. The discomfort belonged to the people who had made money a surprise and tried to turn a birthday into a test of loyalty. I could feel my heartbeat in my hands, but I kept my voice low. Calm did not mean I was not angry. It meant I would not let anger make the facts less visible. There was a part of me that wanted to whisper, "Pay this once," and leave. That part remembered every old family dinner where I had been praised for being the calm one. But calmness without a boundary is only compliance with better manners. I wanted a different kind of calm, the kind that can sit with tension while the truth is read out loud. While we waited, Danielle tried to pull me aside. "You're embarrassing me," she said. I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the word was so familiar. She had announced my supposed payment in front of 40 people. She had placed a bill in front of me. She had turned my silence into a public obligation, but I was embarrassing her by asking for the receipt. "I'm not embarrassing you," I said. "I'm reading the agreement. There is no agreement. We're sisters." "Then why did you text me an amount?" She looked away. The server returned with 2 sheets and the black folder. Behind her, the restaurant manager stood near the host's stand, not listening closely enough to be obvious, but close enough to be available. The event order listed the private room deposit. It was exactly the amount Danielle had sent me. Below it, there were additions. A premium appetizer package ordered 6 days after the deposit. A wine service package for 36 guests. A custom dessert cart. A second round of cocktails. A gratuity adjustment. And a line labeled host-approved upgrades. I asked the server, who approved these. She did not answer immediately. She looked at the event order. "The primary host signed for the upgrades," she said. "Who was the primary host?" Danielle's hand moved toward the folder. The server held it steady. "The primary host was Danielle Carter," she said. For the first time that night, the whole room heard a fact that was not shaped like a joke. Danielle had approved the extras. Danielle had signed for the upgrades. And the folder beside the register was still waiting. The manager's presence gave the exchange an unexpected structure. He did not take sides. He did not comment on family dynamics. He simply explained the document in front of him. That was all I needed. Sometimes the most powerful witness is not a person who argues for you, but a record that cannot be talked over. The event order had dates. The order had signatures. The order did not care who felt embarrassed by the answer. The event order also showed the time of each edition. That detail mattered. Danielle had added the upgrades after I sent my limit in writing. The dates made the sequence impossible to blur. First I agreed to the room, then she chose more. Then she told people I was paying. The timeline was not cruel. It was simply complete. Danielle tried to change the subject. "It doesn't matter who signed it," she said. "We were all celebrating together, but it mattered. It mattered because she had turned her choices into my responsibility without saying so. It mattered because I had agreed to one expense, and she had built an entire evening around the assumption that I would not challenge her in public. I opened a group text between Danielle, my mother, and me from the week before. Danielle had written, "Maya is covering the room fee, so I can make the rest special." My mother had replied with heart emojis. I had answered, "Yes, I'm covering the room fee only. Please keep all additional costs under your own name." It was there in plain English. I had forgotten that I sent it because no one had responded. But silence is not permission. I held my phone out toward Danielle. "Do you remember this?" I asked. She did not look at it. Mother did, then my mother laughed. The group text did not make Danielle a villain. It did something more useful. It removed the excuse that she had misunderstood me. The server returned to the table with the second folder. "There is also a balance on the host account," she said. "Would you like me to place it here?" Danielle said, "No." The server paused. "Would you like it returned to the host stand?" Danielle's answer was too quiet for the room, but everyone heard it. Yes. And in that moment, the party stopped being about whether I would pay. It became about why there was another balance at all. I had learned that a saved message can be a form of self-respect. It does not mean you expect the worst from people. It means you recognize that pressure often changes the story after the fact. The group text protected me from that. It gave the room a beginning point, the amount I accepted, the limit I named, and the silence that followed when Danielle chose not to acknowledge it. No one at the table needed to know every private conversation I had ever had with my sister. The one text was enough. It did not expose her entire life. It exposed one decision. I was careful about that because I did not want clarity to become cruelty. The goal was not to humiliate Danielle. The goal was to stop a false obligation from becoming mine. The itemized bill was not small. The room deposit I had agreed to cover was $800. The rest of the evening added more than 3 times that amount. But what hurt was not the number. It was the planning. Each extra had a date beside it. The appetizers were added after Danielle posted online that she wanted the party to feel unforgettable. The wine service was added after she invited coworkers she had not originally included. The dessert cart was added because Lauren, one of her friends, said a restaurant birthday needed a reveal. The second round of cocktails was added that same afternoon. None of those decisions had anything to do with me. Yet Danielle had treated my credit card like a safety net hanging behind the celebration. My brother-in-law said, "Can't you just pay it and work it out later?" I looked at him. Work what out later? The details. The details are the entire bill. Someone at the far end of the table laughed nervously. Someone else began stacking napkins. People were uncomfortable, and I understood why. They had been invited to a birthday dinner, not a financial boundary. But I was no longer willing to hide a boundary just because it made witnesses uneasy. I pointed to the first line. I will pay the private room deposit. That is what I agreed to. Then I pointed to the rest. These were Danielle's choices. She signed for them. They are not mine. Danielle's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I felt the old pull to fix everything. Then I remembered the message. Just the private room fee. Nothing else. Promise. The promise was not made by me. It was made to me. I was not interested in listing every expense. To prove Danielle was irresponsible. The itemized bill was not a moral scorecard. It was simply a map of choices. Some choices were reasonable, others were indulgent. All of them belonged to the person who approved them. That was the principle I wanted the room to understand. A person can celebrate making mistakes, but they cannot quietly transfer ownership of those choices to someone else. My mother later said that birthdays make people emotional. I agreed. They do. But emotion is not a license to create debt for someone else. A birthday can be special without becoming expensive. And an expensive event can be planned without using another person's money as an invisible guarantee. That was a lesson I wished our family had learned years earlier. The server did not rush us. She waited with the patience of someone who knew her job was to present the bill, not solve the family. Danielle stood up. "I need some air," she said. But before she could leave, the manager approached. "Miss Carter," he said gently, looking at Danielle, "there is one matter we need to clarify. The remaining balance was attached to the card you placed on file when you booked the event, Danielle Fro." The manager continued, still professional. "Your card was pre-authorized for the host-approved upgrades. We can charge the remaining balance to the card on file, or you may use another method." That was the second check, not another bill for me. A record of the card Danielle had used when she assumed I would cover the total. The label I had noticed on the second folder had one line on it. Host account, Danielle Carter. My mother tried to step in. "Maybe we should all contribute," she said. I looked at her. If people want to give Danielle a birthday gift, that is their decision. But no one should be pressured to pay for something they did not approve. The manager stepped back. Danielle sat down again. She looked smaller, but I did not feel victorious. I felt tired, because the truth had not created the problem. It had only made the planning visible, and the planning had been there all along. For a moment, I felt sorry for Danielle because I knew she had built the party around an image of success. But sympathy and surrender are not the same thing. I could understand her fear of disappointing people without agreeing to fund the performance. I could wish her a good birthday without paying for a plan that had been designed in secret. The second check made that separation possible. When the manager explained the host account, I felt a strange relief. Not because the room had turned against Danielle, but because the restaurant's process was more honest than the family script. The process had names, dates, signatures, and a card on file. It did not reward whoever spoke first, or whoever looked most upset. Danielle eventually handed the manager another card. She did it without looking at me. The receipt printed. The manager placed it in front of her with a pen. For a second, she hesitated. Then she signed. I watched the signature because it mattered more than any speech she could make. A signature says, "I am responsible for this." It was the sentence she had tried to hand to me. When the manager walked away, Danielle sighed, "Uruka's private. You announced it publicly. You knew I was overwhelmed. I knew you asked me for a room deposit. You always have money." There it was. The belief underneath everything. Because I worked hard and budgeted carefully, my resources were treated as family property. My ability to pay had become proof that I should pay. I said, having money does not mean I agreed to spend it. My mother began to cry. My aunt, who had been quiet all evening, reached for her hand. Danielle looked toward the guests. They're all going to think I'm irresponsible. I did not say what I was thinking. I said, they saw the receipt. They saw the text. What they think is not something I can manage for you. Then I picked up my own copy of the event order. I paid the room deposit with my card. The server handed me the receipt. One line, one amount, one decision I had actually made. The signature on the card slip was not dramatic, but it was meaningful. A signature is a quiet act of accountability. It does not need an audience. It only needs the person whose decision created the charge. Watching Danielle sign felt less like winning and more like watching a responsibility return to its proper place. Danielle's hardest moment was not signing the receipt. It was realizing that the story she had told the guests could not survive the documents. I knew that feeling was painful. I also knew it was necessary. Accountability often arrives quietly, on a piece of paper, after everyone has run out of ways to call a clear boundary rude. Paying only my part felt strange. Not because it was wrong, because I had spent so long treating partial help as abandonment. My family had trained me to believe that if I could solve the whole problem, I should. If I could absorb the stress, I should. If I could keep the dinner moving, keep the party happy, keep everyone from feeling disappointed, then I should. But I was beginning to understand that a boundary is not a refusal to love people. It is a refusal to carry choices they refuse to own. I placed my signed receipt into my purse. Danielle remained at the table while her friends tried to recover the mood. Someone brought out the birthday cake. A few people sang softly. It was awkward. I did not stay for the cake. I walked to Danielle and said, "I hope you have a good birthday. But I will not be used as a backup payer again." She stared at the tablecloth. "You could have just told me no before tonight." I did. That was the part she could not answer. I had told her no in the group text. I had told her exactly what I would pay. She had heard it, but she had built a plan that depended on pretending I had not. I left the restaurant with my coat over my arm. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute before I called a rideshare. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel guilty for leaving a problem unfinished. The problem belonged to the person who created it. I did not owe anyone an explanation for why I would not pay beyond the line I had agreed to. Still, I explained because I wanted my own actions to be clear. I paid the deposit. I thanked the server. I wished Danielle a good night. Then I left. The simplicity of that sequence mattered. I did not need to create a scene to stop participating in one. Leaving early gave me time to notice how much my body had been carrying. My shoulders hurt. My jaw hurt. I had been bracing for the moment someone would accuse me of ruining everything, but I had not ruined the dinner. I had refused to let a hidden financial plan become a permanent family rule. On the ride home, I watched the city lights pass the window and replayed the night. I did not replay it because I wanted to punish myself. I replayed it because I wanted to learn from it. There had been signs. Danielle had been vague about the final guest count. She had avoided sending me the restaurant contract. She had joked that I was her birthday sponsor. My mother had used the phrase helping out, without ever saying how much help was expected. And I had wanted to believe everyone would respect the amount I agreed to. That was my mistake, not paying the bill. Assuming that an unspoken expectation would become fair, because we were family. When I got home, I opened a spreadsheet I had started months earlier. It listed every family expense I had covered in the past 2 years. Emergency car repair for my brother. Plane ticket for my mother. Deposit for Danielle's previous birthday trip. A cousin's utility bill. The list was longer than I expected. None of the entries were dramatic alone. Together, they told a story. I had not become the family's emergency wallet in one night. I had become it slowly, through dozens of small moments where I paid first and asked questions later. That night, I added a final row. Danielle's birthday dinner, room deposit only, paid as agreed. Then I wrote one new rule at the top of the sheet. No expense without a written amount, written purpose, and written payer. It was not harsh. It was clear. The spreadsheet was not about resentment. It was about perspective. Numbers can be kinder than memory because they show a pattern without exaggeration. I could see which expenses had been emergencies and which had been conveniences dressed up as emergencies. I could see how often I had said yes because a request arrived with urgency, and I could see how rarely anyone had asked whether saying yes was easy for me. The ride home made one thing clear. I did not need a larger income to be treated fairly. I needed a system that kept my willingness from being mistaken for unlimited access. A simple written agreement could do that. It could turn a vague request into a choice and stop last-minute guilt from doing the rest. The next morning, I sent one message to my immediate family. I did not send it while angry. I waited until I could write, without trying to make anyone feel what I felt. The message said, "Last night, I paid the private room deposit because that was the amount I agreed to in writing. I did not approve the upgrades, the food and beverage packages, or the remaining balance. Going forward, I will not accept public assumptions about my money. Any request for financial help must include the amount, the purpose, and the person responsible for the final bill. If those details are not confirmed in writing, the answer will be no. I read it twice." Then I added, "This is not punishment. It is a boundary." My mother responded first. "I understand, but I wish you had been kinder. I stared at the message. I wanted to ask her why kindness always meant protecting the person who had crossed the line. Instead, I wrote, I was calm. I paid what I promised. I did not insult Danielle. I asked for the records. My brother-in-law wrote, we didn't realize how much was added. I replied, that is why itemized receipts exist. Danielle did not respond that day, but 2 days later, she sent one sentence. I should have asked you. It was not a complete apology, but it was the first honest sentence she had written about the dinner. I waited before sending the message because I wanted it to survive the next conversation. I did not want a paragraph that sounded good only while I was upset. I wanted a rule I could live by when things were calm. That is what boundaries are for. They make future decisions easier by reducing the power of last-minute pressure. The message I sent did not say I would never help again. That was important to me. I did not want pain to make me hard. I wanted it to make me precise. Help would still exist, but help would have a purpose, an amount, and an owner. No more emotional invoices dropped in public. At Sunday lunch the following week, my uncle pulled me aside. Your sister is embarrassed, he said. I nodded. I understand. You could make this easier by telling everyone it was a misunderstanding. I looked at him. It was not a misunderstanding. It was an assumption. Same difference. No, I said. A misunderstanding happens when two people hear the same thing differently. An assumption happens when one person decides another person will pay and tells everyone before asking. He did not have an answer. At the table, Danielle was quiet. My mother was overly cheerful. Everyone seemed to be waiting for me to return to my old role and make the tension disappear, but I did not explain myself. I ate lunch. I spoke to my cousin about her new job. I helped clear plates because I wanted to, not because I was trying to earn peace. When Danielle left, she stopped beside me. I'm paying off the balance, she said. I picked up an extra weekend shift. That is good, I said. You really think I planned it? I looked at her. I think you planned a party beyond what you could afford and expected me to protect you from the result. Her eyes filled again. I was scared people would think I failed. Then you should have reduced the plan before you made it everyone else's problem. She nodded slowly. It was not a warm moment, but it was real. At Sunday lunch, I noticed how quickly relatives wanted a clean ending. They wanted to turn the entire night into a misunderstanding because misunderstandings do not require anyone to change their habits. But real accountability is less comfortable. It asks people to name what they assumed, what they expected, and what they will do differently next time. My uncle eventually admitted that he had assumed Danielle had already discussed the bill with me. That admission showed why assumptions are so dangerous. They move through a family like facts when no one checks them. By asking for the record, I had interrupted that movement. I had made everyone slow down long enough to see what was real. Months passed. The family did not become perfect. Danielle and I did not suddenly become easy sisters. But the pattern changed because I changed my response. When my mother wanted help with a weekend trip, she sent the hotel estimate first. When my brother needed a loan, he wrote the repayment date in a text. When Danielle planned another event, she did not ask me to sponsor it. She asked if I wanted to attend, and I said yes, because attendance was finally separate from payment. That was the difference. I could love my family without financing every plan. I could celebrate someone without becoming their contingency budget. And I could leave a restaurant without carrying a bill that did not belong to me. I kept the birthday dinner receipt in a folder called Agreements. Not because I wanted to remember Danielle at her worst. Because I wanted to remember myself at my clearest. The receipt was ordinary paper. The amount was not a secret. The signature was not dramatic. But the document marked a change. It was the first time I had allowed a public expectation to meet a private record. And the record had won. The next few months did not bring a dramatic transformation. They brought smaller, better questions. How much is it? Who is an reservation? When? Those questions were not romantic, but they were respectful. They turned family, help from an emotional ambush, into a decision. That was enough for me. Danielle's later changes were not grand. She started asking before she planned. She sent estimates. She used phrases like, "Would this work for you?" instead of "You'll cover it." Right. Those phrases may seem small, but respect is built from small sentences repeated over time. I used to think boundaries needed to be understood to be valid. I thought I had to explain them perfectly, defend them gently, and wait for everyone to agree that I was reasonable. I do not think that anymore. A boundary is valid when it protects what you are responsible for. Your time, your money, your peace, your child, your work, your dignity. At Danielle's birthday dinner, 40 guests watched me become someone different. Not louder, not crueler, just clearer. I did not need applause when I paid only my part. I did not need the room to agree when I asked for the itemized check. I did not need my family to call me generous in order to know I had been fair. The second check did not expose a monster. It revealed a pattern, and once a pattern has a name, you can stop feeding it. Now, when someone in my family asks for help, I still listen. But I ask 3 questions first. What is the amount? What is the purpose? Who is responsible for the final bill? If the answer is clear, I decide freely. If the answer is vague, I do not step into the fog, because I have learned something important. Being the responsible sister does not mean being the sister who pays for everything. It means being responsible enough to know when the bill is not yours. I no longer measure my love by how much financial chaos I can absorb. I measure it by whether my help is freely chosen, whether the terms are honest, and whether I can give without disappearing. That night at the restaurant taught me that fairness does not always look warm in the moment. Sometimes fairness looks like an itemized receipt and a quiet no. I keep the receipt because it reminds me that boundaries do not always arrive as speeches. Sometimes they arrive as a question asked calmly at a restaurant table. Could I see the itemized check? From that one question came a new rule, a clearer family language, and a version of myself that no longer panics when someone expects a rescue